Good morning, and welcome to the Financial Optimist. And today I'm asking the question, just how much money should be in your emergency fund? Well, if you were to go around and ask people about this, the most common answer you get is between 3 and 6 months worth of expenses. And that is the conventional wisdom. As long as you have enough money to last for about 3 or 6 months, you should be good to go. But why is that? Well, because historically, whenever people lose their jobs, a layoff, a company goes under, usually people can find a new job within just a few months. And as long as you have enough money to cover a few months of expenses, you're good to go. But in today's economy, a lot of people are unemployed for more than 6 months. I even know of a couple of men who've told me their girlfriends or wives haven't had a job in a year. They were laid off a year ago, have been looking for a job, haven't found much, maybe a little bit of part-time work, so if they only had 6 months of savings, they wouldn't have made it. The only reason why they're doing all right is because they're staying with a man who's able to pay the bills for them. So, with that said, perhaps a 12-month emergency fund really is the best way moving forward. So let's say, for example, your monthly expenses were $6,000 a month. A 3-month emergency fund would be $18,000 in the bank, and a 6-month emergency fund would be more like $36,000 in the bank. That's how the computer came at the $35,000 number for an average American household. But if you had a 12-month emergency fund, that would be more like $72,000 in the bank if you had $6,000 monthly expenses. So you look at that, you go, okay, how much money do the actual Americans actually have? Well, this website here, average American has around $17,000 of actual emergency savings. So that's something, but that's more like a 3-month supply for a lot of the average households. But if you want a 12-month supply, you're going to need a bit more than that. And what's really concerning here is this part right here. 83% of hourly workers in the U.S. have less than $500 of savings. Now, granted, hourly workers do tend to make a bit less than their salary counterparts, but 83%, that's almost 9 out of 10 hourly workers have less than $500 in savings. One small emergency, one car repair bill comes up, and you're wiped out. This reminds me of a time when I was serving in the military, and the military messed up our paycheck. We got our paychecks a week late. Well, there was this one soldier I served with. He was a staff sergeant. And he told me in that week he was waiting for his paycheck to come in. He had over $400 of late fees that accrued in a single week. He was living paycheck to paycheck to the max. Like, he was right at the very limit, barely able to get by. And mind you, he's a staff sergeant. That's the E6 pay grade. I was a private first class. That's the E3 pay grade. He made more money than me, and yet I had more money than he did. I had thousands of dollars in my bank account for an emergency. He had nothing. So all it took was one late paycheck, and he had hundreds of dollars of late fees accruing. If he had even a few $100s in savings, he could have taken care of those fees. But he was really stressed out. I remember looking at that man completely stressed out, unable to, deal with the situation on his own. I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute. This is the military. You're a staff sergeant. I'm a private. If we go to combat, if our unit deploys, you're the one that's supposed to lead me into combat and keep me alive. But you can't even balance a checkbook. How am I supposed to expect you to keep me safe in a combat zone if you can't even keep your bank account alive? I mean, I lost all respect for that man right there. Because, he chose to live the paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle. He chose to be living right on the edge and have no emergency funds. And yet, it didn't work out. One small emergency, a late paycheck, and he lost it all. So that taught me a very valuable lesson. Always, always, always have savings. I don't know about you, but one thing I get from the emergency fund is peace of mind. Even if the money sits in the bank and never gets spent, you are purchasing peace of mind, which lowers your stress and lowers your cortisol levels. So I sleep soundly at night knowing if there was ever an emergency, all I gotta do is pull up my checkbook, write a big number on there, hand it out, and the problem goes away. So because I always have an emergency fund, I know I'm going to be just fine. And when it comes to average amount of savings by age, and granted this website here is talking about savings, not necessarily emergency fund, which is similar but not necessarily the same thing. This website shows that young men under 35 is around $20,000, and as you get older, it gradually increases. So by the time you're at retirement age, we're talking about $100,000 in the bank. So, old people do tend to have a bit more money. Younger people tend to have a lot less, and that's pretty common. And so at least I know in my life, I look at this kind of emergency fund, I think, okay, I'm a household of one, so I could get by on less than this. And if you watch my video from my July breakdown, you'll notice I spent less than $500 in July. That's because I live a low bills lifestyle. I've chosen to live a lifestyle where I have very, very few bills. I simply just don't buy things I don't need. And so my goal for the whole year is to spend less than $1,000 per month on average. So my cheaper months may be less than that. My more expensive months may be a little more than that. But on average, I can get by on $1,000 a month. So for me, if I follow this advice, that's $3,000 to $6,000. But if I want to go for a 12-month emergency fund, then $12,000 would be a better amount for me because I have very, very few bills. And if I have a lot of savings and I have a very low monthly bills, my savings will last for a very, very long time. But how much money would you spend if there actually was an emergency? Well, here this website says the average car repair bill is around $838. I know last year I took my car to a repair shop to fix the air conditioning. They wanted $1,600. I went to a different shop. They wanted the same money, $1,600 to replace the air conditioner. And I had to do it because here in Florida, it's very, very hot and you really do need the air conditioning. So I paid the money, which is about double what the average repair cost is. So if I did have 36 months of expenses, which for me is $36,000, that car repair bill was more than my entire monthly budget. So, perhaps having more like $15,000 or $20,000 is better for someone like me because it gives me a whole year of expenses plus a few other oddball things in there as well. But if you're someone with a household of 2, 3, 4 kids, perhaps $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 might be a more applicable amount. And also keep in mind where you live. If you live in a more expensive state like New York or California, maybe you need a little more. If you live in a cheaper state like Alabama or Mississippi, perhaps a little less is fine. It all depends on what is your actual monthly expenses, have enough for 3 to 6 months. Alright, so let's look at some other expenses. What are the hospitals? So if you stay here in the US, if you stay at a for-profit hospital, it's around $2,400 a month. If you go to a local government hospital, around $2,900 a month, and a non-profit is around $3,200 a month. Well, at first you may notice, wait a second, the for-profit charges less money than a non-profit. Doesn't that sound backwards? Well, perhaps it does, but keep in mind, for-profits have to be more efficient to keep the costs low. But one thing that's very important here is don't share this video with any of your European friends. As soon as they hear we got to pay for the hospitals, they're going to flood my comment section with all the remarks about how healthcare is free in Europe. And obviously we don't want to get that again. They love doing that every time they hear an American talk about healthcare. They have to remind us about how it's free over there. Well, if you leave those comments, I'm going to ask you how much you pay in taxes. Because, here in America we pay a lot less in taxes, but we also have to pay for more things on our own. So don't share this video with any of your European friends. But let's ask yourself, okay, I got good health insurance, I'm good to go. But what if, your company goes bankrupt, you get laid off, suddenly you're without health insurance, and you get hit with a hospital bill? If it's $3,000 a day, and you're there for a week, you're talking well over $20,000 just for a single week. So if you only had $20,000 of emergency fund, that could be gone in a week at the hospital. So you better have good health insurance, and perhaps have a larger emergency fund to make sure you can cover those bills. Alright. What about home repair expenses? Well, one thing you'll notice here is in every category, on the low end, it's a few $100s. On the high end, thousands. This one here is anywhere from $150 to $16,000 for roof maintenance. Foundation may cost as little as $250 or as much as almost $20,000. For siding, as little as $150, as much as about $16,000. Now you look down each of the categories, it's the same thing. Septic tank as little as $626 or as much as $15,000. So if you got a home repair bill, that could easily eat up an emergency fund in no time at all. So as you look at this, you realize we really do need to have a larger 12-month emergency fund. We're talking well into the tens of thousands of dollars. If you've got a large family, say 5 or 6 children, and you're living in an expensive place like California or New York, we're talking probably $100,000 which you might need for savings. And keep in mind, the United States is currently the 13th most expensive country on the planet. So if you're in one of the countries that's more expensive than the US, you may need even more than that. If you're in one of the cheaper countries out there, then your emergency fund could likely be a bit less than that. It all depends on what your actual bills are and what your potential expenses are. So as I look at this, I realize having a little bit of savings isn't enough. We really need more than that. And of course, I'm not talking about your retirement, your 401k. I'm not talking about any investments in the stock market. I'm talking just savings account, like just money in the bank, a money market account, a high-yield savings account. You get about 4 or 5% these days. I'm getting about 4.3% at my bank, so I'm getting a pretty good rate there. And that's just, having, tens of thousands of dollars set aside for a quick emergency. And anything above that, you can always invest that, of course. But here at the Financial Optimist, I don't give investment advice. I only talk about personal finance and how to save money. If you want to know where to invest your money, you got to go watch one of the investment channels on YouTube, because I don't give that kind of advice out. But if you have any other questions about personal finance, if you have any questions about emergency funds or savings accounts, drop them below in the comment section. I'd love to answer your questions. Otherwise, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.